Hey guys, round 7. Eugene had a nice win. I had a tough loss to Grandmaster Benjamin Gledura from Hungary.
Yeah, he's very high rated, right? 2650 or something.
Yeah, 2630, talented player. But you guys will see, it was actually a really interesting middle game. But let's start with your game.
Yes. All right. So let's take a look. So I was playing a youngster, Nikhil Kumar. I think he's from United States. Very talented junior. But somehow today he didn't really bring his A game to the game, and kind of fell apart rather quickly after getting maybe equal position out of the opening. So let's take a look. D4, knight f6, and he, by the way, blitzed this out really quickly, and he's never played the London system before. So I was thinking maybe he's doing some kind of prep.
Yeah.
So as you guys probably know, I play a lot of openings, including King's Indian, and this was the King's Indian setup that I was going for. And if you want to find out more about different openings and ideas, you should check out my website, chessopeningsexplained.com. And let me just show how quickly I got an advantage with black out of the opening. So I just play my normal King's Indian setup. He goes for this London system approach. And here I played c5. Normally you start with d6. It's important to know that this is not really that dangerous if he takes the pawn. I have several ways. I can probably jump with the knight, but the simplest is just check, followed by queen takes pawn. That's also good enough. But okay, so c3 is kind of the default move in the London system. So he's trying to build this wall against the bishop, b2, c3, d4, f2, e3. And now the drawback of the bishop on f4 in these setups is queen can go b6. And that's what happens in the game. So it's actually not easy for him to protect the b2 pawn. b3 weakens diagonal. Queen c1 is going to get attacked on the c file at some moment. So he plays queen b3. This is all well-known theory. d6, h3, making sure that after knight h5 the bishop can escape. Bishop e6, takes, and a3. And he kind of blitzed this out instantly, which made me kind of surprised. I'm like, what is he trying to achieve here? It's a well-known position. It's supposed to be about equal. Then I thought maybe he's just trying to make a draw.
Yeah, I mean, can you really prepare anything here with white? That's
this is just a standard position. There's lots of different plans for either side. You know, it's, I'm not sure what his preparation is based off. But it's very solid for white. I had one game in the database which I drew against Israeli Grandmaster Danny Raznikov here as black. So I kind of played the plan. The idea here is the bishop should be on the long diagonal, so I just started transferring the bishop quickly there.
Oh, that's nice.
And now everything is well protected, and the knight goes to d7 here. And I can start by pressing the b5 at some moment, b5 c4 or b5 b4 ideas. So it's still very solid. Obviously white should not lose this. So the aforementioned game with Danny Raznikov went here, b5, takes, knight e5, takes, and we just traded everything and got a draw. Bishop h2 is what my opponent played rather quickly, which again, suspecting this is probably his prep. Just this kind of standard move, waiting to see what black's gonna do. Black has many different plans. I like the plan that I played in the game, b5, followed by knight b6. And so he tries to gain the center, which is logical, and just knight a4, pretty good move. He plays rook b1, protecting the pawn. And I like my next move. I play rook to d8. This is indirectly putting pressure on the bishop and the knight. There are a lot of lines where now if you play something like rook e1 with the idea to play e5, I can play e5 myself. And after takes, there's going to be a lot of x-ray problems over here, and after takes c4, he is dropping a piece. So that prompts his next move. After rook d8, bishop c2, trying to get out of the pin. Again, the position remains roughly equal. I'm pretty sure there's at least 5 or 10 moves that don't really change the valuation. During the game, I was thinking about bishop h6, also knight h5 with the same idea, bishop h6 and knight h4 and e5, but I wasn't sure about this g4 push here. So I just played more solid move, knight e8. I don't think e5 is good for him because that just opens up my bishop, and again opens up the d file if I take. So what to do?
Yeah, it's not clear for white.
I was thinking he might try this move d5, but it actually structure favors black. Do you guys know what kind of opening this looks like? Well, I wrote a book on it. Look at the bishop, look at the pawn structure. This is the dragon, right?
Dragon,
what is the bishop doing on h2? And the dragon guy swings with his tail. So these pawns, I'm going to play either c4 or b4. b2 is always going to be weak, and if he takes, I have a pleasant choice, rook takes or even pawn takes on doubling. And honestly, e5 is only going to make the d pawn weaker. So this is just not a good version of the dragon.
Yeah.
So after knight e8, he plays rook e1, rook f e1. And here I like my next move, e5. Again, using that tactic, the knight on d2 is going to be under attack if he takes. So again, the tactic is quite simple. If he takes on e5, for instance with the bishop, I'm going to take back. And this knight is just hanging there. So he can't do this. So after that, he played c4, trying to get some counterplay going. But okay, now I like my next move. I simply cut off that bishop on h2. And my bishop can join the party on h6 or f8, whereas his bishop is going to take a lot of moves to even enter the game.
Really strong. And
now this is solid. I kind of expected him to take. This is what I calculated during the game, to give me this check and to play knight c4. But he has no threats. Oh, by the way, this is also a cute line. The bishop here, I can actually offer him this pawn. And now something like that. And the bishop is going to get trapped. Or I'm going to rather win the pawn back.
Yeah.
So yeah, moves like that. So I expected knight c4. And my idea was to play bishop h6. Activate the bishop. And I can double the rooks on the d file. Or play knight d6 at any moment. I think black is just better.
Knight d6 is very helpful for you to trade, right? Leave with that
leave
bishop
with the bad bishop.
Yeah.
So it's one of those positions where you have one bad piece, the whole position is bad. Anyway, so he tries this drastic measures to free the bishop with g4, with the idea to push g5 at some moment. So I played h6, and now he went for this line, which shocked me. He played this almost instantly.
G5.
I'm like, what did I blunder here? And look at that, guys. He actually uncorks this idea, bishop takes e5, with the idea that if I take, there's going to be some crazy tactic starting with this check. If I try to make a run for it, I could end up in big trouble.
Oh, bishop d1.
And now, what's the simplest? Check. I have to take the... Well, I can play king h5, but it doesn't look good. And if I take the pawn, that's not good, guys. I think I may get mated somehow.
Yeah, I mean, like...
definitely not the position you want to play.
In king h1, rook g1.
Yeah, or knight g5, and then rook e3, rook h3.
Yeah.
So many different plans. So yeah, I mean, that's a suicidal plan. So you don't want to do that. So I simply played, I think, the best move in the position, rook takes d2. If knight takes, I'm going to take on e5. 2 pieces for the rook should be pretty good advantage for black.
So when you played g5, how much time did you calculate? Like, how much time did you spend there?
After he played g5, I probably spent like a good chunk of time here. I don't know, making sure all the lines work, maybe at least 10 minutes. But I would have to look it up.
And you already realized here that his idea was bishop takes e5?
Yeah, I saw that.
And then you just
I saw rook d2, and then I'm like, bishop f6 probably doesn't work. And so I'm like, trying to figure out what I missed.
Yeah, it's actually not that hard to refute. Just take d2.
And he played it so quickly, I'm like, I must be lost if he played so quickly, right? But he just went into a bad position, really kind of self-destruction mode. And so after this, very nice intermezzo, guys. Let's see if you can spot it.
So black to play, and I would suggest to count the material first to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, black's rook is under attack, so it's white's bishop. But keep in mind you are up a piece already, which is a good sign. And the right answer here is simply rook d3. Don't be afraid of the knight takes g5 check. Because after this, if he plays knight f7 check, he actually has no threats. There's no discovery that works.
Right, because his bishop
is under attack. And if knight h6 double check, I can just move my king anywhere.
Yeah, people forget this all the time because we're so afraid of discover checks.
Yeah.
But if you're attacking the piece, you're usually pretty safe.
Yeah, maybe he missed something here, but this just looks already losing. So he had to kind of bail out piece down position with takes. I could have taken with the king, but I thought knight is safer, and bishop d5. So let's count the material. Black's up a piece, but white's got, what, 2 pawns for it?
Yeah.
So it's not that bad. And now with my next move, I'm actually sacrificing a 3rd pawn. So the question here, guys, is why is black winning here? even though if you just count the material, it looks even. And the answer is the relative value of the pieces. All my pieces are active, his king is exposed, and I can still attack his weak pawns. Pawn on h3, pawn on e4, pawn on b2, and my pieces are just so much better placed.
Right.
So, and knight's coming to f4, I think I'm just winning, and that's what happened. The rest is kind of pretty easy, but I'll show you one cute tactic at the end. So takes, takes, nice intermezzo again, another intermezzo,
Nice.
rook d2, and here I kind of had to calculate the following sequence, which I calculated, I think, accurately, because it's all forced. I'm about to queen my pawn. Otherwise c3, so he has to do this. And now I really like my next move, rook f8. So this is a funny position. If knight takes d3, can you guys find my next move? And notice that I don't want to take the knight, and he has rook c2, and somehow it's still a game. The simple move that wins is rook takes rook. And if king takes, then I take with check, and I just promote my pawn.
Right.
And funny enough, if knight takes, for the moment, he's actually up material.
3 pawns.
Yes. But this move just simply wins.
Yeah.
The pawn can't be stopped. So I kind of put all my money on the c pawn. So you see, pass pawns, guys, is very crucial in chess. So he tries this last trick. So the idea is, if I take on f2, he's gonna take, and after this, he's gonna go here. And it's some kind of a mess. But we both queen, and who knows what's going on.
Right.
So, but there is much simpler win here. Again, try to calculate this out, guys. One move wins pretty clearly here for black. Again, accuracy is required. Kind of same ideas you've seen before. All right, if you need more time, go ahead and pause the video. And the move is c2. Just kind of reverse the move order. If he plays rook takes f8, then you queen with check. And if he takes knight takes d3, that's what happened in the game. Then now, same idea as before. Rook f2, and that forces immediate resignation. Because if king takes knight d3, if knight takes, then I queen.
So pretty nice endgame win.
Yep, and one more line, he could have tried this move. Well, it's not really a line. But I can just play rook f8 and win, but the knight protects the rook. And nice. He queens, and I queen with mate.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a nice game, relatively quick game. My opponent kind of self-destructed in the, you know, queenless, we can say, middle game.
Right.
Just kind of went on this berserk tactics that didn't work.
Yeah.
All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed the game. Again, for more openings, please check out my website, chessopeningsexplained.com. And now Kostya is going to take over and show you that his opening was rock solid, but he misplayed it a little bit against a stronger player.
Thanks, Eugene. All right, guys. So here I was facing Grandmaster Benjamin Gledura from Hungary, and he made waves, you know, a couple of years ago in Gibraltar when he beat Vishy Anand in like a very simple, clean, like endgame win. So ever since that game, I think Gledura has been kind of rising in the world's rankings, and now he's like well over 2,600 and a really strong player. Okay, so he definitely surprised me in the opening by playing e4 because he's a very positional guy. He's mostly playing knight f3 and d4. But he went for this line in the Taimanov. I wasn't exactly sure why. I think maybe because after f4, bishop b4, bishop d3, the main line for black here is to play knight a5, and we get this endgame after a3, bishop takes c3. That's pretty balanced. I think black is perfectly fine here, but some players really like this kind of endgame for white, and I think maybe that's what he was aiming at. But instead I played castles, which is just a different way to meet the system to keep all the pieces on the board. And after a3, I go back bishop e7. And the idea is that normally white is aiming to castle queenside in this position. And the fact that we've induced the move a3 is very useful for black later on, because then I'll play b5 and I have a hook with b4. But here he goes h3, which is definitely not the main line. But I won't go into too many details here on the opening because, well, these are opening secrets, you know, can't give everything away for free. Except this video. This video is free, so you get to learn from the rest of it. But if you do want to check out more detail on the opening, you can visit my Patreon page. There's going to be a link to it below. And on this page, I'm analyzing all my games and providing a lot of insight into the opening. Okay, well, I played d6. I think this is a pretty standard move. And here he really surprised me with short castles. The reason this is so surprising is because normally, like I mentioned, white is trying to castle queenside in this line, which is always going to be a little bit more ambitious, a little bit more aggressive. He's ready to play g4, and black has fair share of counter chances here as well. But after castles, we're getting kind of a standard, Scheveningen type position, where white got this move a3 in for free, which I don't think makes a huge difference, and the pieces aren't arranged exactly in the most popular way. But the line definitely makes sense for white, but I also think that black should be okay here. Now black has a couple of options. I can definitely play the move like bishop d7, just something solid and just developing, and then I can follow it with b5 or trading on d4 and playing bishop c6. I think this is a very normal way to play this kind of position. But I went for something a little bit more direct here with knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, and e5. And this is a common way for black to try and equalize in this kind of structure. White shouldn't really take on e5 in most cases because black recaptures, and then I think this has actually helped black because we don't have this d6 pawn that's sometimes a weakness, or at least a passive pawn. So structurally black is very happy here. I think the best move is probably just something simple like bishop e6, and then rooks come to the center and black has zero issues. So instead he played bishop e3. And now I don't have to take on f4, but this is a very common way again for black to play. I think b5 is also very possible here. Because if white tries to advance with something like f5, I'll just play bishop to b7. And this idea with bishop g5 and trying to take on f6 is not so dangerous if my bishop is already on d7 and ready to take, the incoming knight on d5. So black can play something like rook fd8, and I think black has no issues here either. But okay, I took on f4, and he took with the rook, which I think is interesting. Bishop takes is also very natural, and I would likely follow up with bishop e6, and I'm just going for this standard idea with knight d7, knight e5. So black definitely has this weak pawn on d6, but on the flip side we have this really nice square on e5 for the knight, and if the knight gets there comfortably, I think usually black has solved all his issues. For example, a common way these games often go is rook at e1, knight d7, stopping any kind of e5. White jumps in with knight d5, black happily gives up the bishop and plays bishop f6. And I think this kind of position is pretty much okay for black. I'm going to try to play g6 and bishop g7 next move, and my knight will come to e5. And if I can get all these moves in, then I think black is very, very comfortable. And that's basically what I was going for in the game. But things didn't exactly work out. So rook takes f4, bishop e6, and he plays knight d5 immediately here. Now the idea is that if I take on d5, he's going to take on h7, and then win back his material. And I can take on c2 here and win a pawn. But I'm not sure because he can also take on b7, and I don't think this line is really worth looking into for black. He can even play moves like bishop d4 and just kind of go for the initiative with rook to g4, and his pieces look very, very nice, and mine just look completely discoordinated. So I didn't take on d5. Instead, I just stuck with the natural knight to d7. And I think this was already kind of starting to get very interesting. So my threat is bishop g5, and if I can trade the dark squared bishops, then I think a lot of times black is pushing to be better with such a strong knight on e5. And the plan is always to play g6 and f5 and really restrict this light squared bishop. So I was expecting a move like rook to f2, and then I would either play knight e5 or bishop f6. I'm not really sure which one exactly. Yeah, maybe knight e5 first, and then if rook a f1, oh, I can even harass him with the move like bishop h4. And I didn't think like white was really going to be very comfortable in this position. If he has to play a move like rook e2, then I'll play... you know, and actually I think I was going to play bishop h4 without knight e5. And now if rook f3, then I get knight e5 with tempo. If rook e2, then I can play bishop f6 and g6. And it's good that his rook is not on f2, because otherwise he could take. So that's why this move bishop h4 is important for black in this line. And yeah, I think once I get g6 in, and then the bishop drops back, knight comes to e5, f5, rook a e8. To me, it just seems like black's position almost plays itself and is really comfortable. But then he played rook to c4 instead, which was quite surprising because, well, it's such an unusual rook maneuver on the 4th rank. I realized his idea is to displace the queen and then try to attack the b7 pawn with rook to b4. So I played queen d8, rook b4, and I simply went back queen to c7. Now, one line I was considering, but I was kind of skeptical of during the game, is this move knight to c5, where I defend the b pawn, and if he wants to win the pawn, he can take the knight and take on b7. But after bishop d6, it turns out black has definitely enough compensation for the pawn. Our queen is coming to h4, and then our rook is going to come to e8. And black can get a pretty serious initiative here on the dark squares, and definitely enough for equality. The problem for white is that the rook on b7 is just kind of out of the game now. It's active, but it's not really attacking anything. It's more of a target. So he'll have to spend time trying to bring it back with rook to b3, and this should give black enough play to kind of equalize the game. So I wasn't sure if I was really getting enough there, and I didn't think I was really in such a desperate position that I needed to give up a pawn, but it's interesting that that line seems to really work for black. Well, instead I went back, queen c7, and of course he doesn't repeat with rook c4, but he plays bishop f5. And I think his idea is simply just to take the knight and play this position where his dark squared bishop is going to be slightly more active than mine. You know, he's going to just put it on d4. I don't think that's too dangerous for black, but to be honest, I didn't really want to play a technical position against this guy. I've seen what he can do in very dry technical positions, and during the game I really felt like I should just try to keep things more complicated and slightly more dynamic. So I didn't want to give him a chance to trade off and try to get some kind of small pull, and I tried to figure out something else. Now the most natural move here would be knight to e5, just putting the knight right where it belongs. And this was my original intention during the game. After bishop to b6, black plays queen to b8. And I kind of talked myself out of it because it just looks like black is really passive here. But there are some things that are going in our favor. For one, we're going to play g6 next move, and we can start to untangle. Then the bishop can again reroute to g7. The queen can come out maybe via e8 and e7. And once black gets all these moves here, I think the game starts turning, and black kind of black gets, I think, a really comfortable game. So I kind of misevaluated this one. To me, it seemed like white has a pull, but analyzing it afterwards and using the engine that's kind of cold and doesn't discriminate, turns out that yeah, this is totally playable, and black is totally okay here. Once I do get my bishop to g7, I can also push f5, f4, and start getting counterplay with the f pawn. So that was definitely the way to go there. Instead, I played this move a5, which I definitely ended up regretting. The idea is to displace the rook. So after rook to b5, knight e5, bishop b6, this was all played, I have the move queen to c4. And I wanted this during the game because here it looks like my pieces are getting some activity. Now if he takes the pawn on a5, I'm basically going to be pretty much okay there, just due to concrete lines. After rook takes a5, we'll trade, bishop takes, and I have this move g6. And there's some simple tactics here, but I think I was able to calculate everything correctly. Bishop d3, knight takes d3, and if queen takes, we have queen c5 check. We pick up this bishop on a5. So white would have to take with the c-pawn in order to keep the bishop protected. I can win back my pawn on d5, and black should have zero issues here. Similarly, he can't take with the bishop because the rook on b5 is hanging, and I was really expecting this move bishop d3, where I was planning to take on d3. Queen takes is pretty much forced, and I think this move rook fc8 gives black a pretty decent game, because I'm either going to recapture with the rook on c4 and hit the c2 pawn, or I'm going to trade and invade on c2 with the rook. And I felt like black should be doing okay here. But instead, he kind of surprised me with the move a4, which I also knew was possible, but I just didn't realize how strong this would be. But it's a much better move than bishop d3 because it just secures the rook on b5, and it also fixes my a5 pawn as a weakness. And this is where things started to go wrong, because now I realized I'm in danger here of being seriously worse, and I could be losing a pawn for almost no compensation. So this was the time to really buckle down, but I just wasn't able to figure out what to do. It turns out my best try was bishop to d8. It's kind of funny, very, very passive, but good defensive move. Now if black trades on d8 and takes the b7 pawn, I have a pretty simple trick with g6 again, and this bishop is really in the way. He has to go back bishop d3, and I can take on d5 and note that there's no discovered attacks with bishop takes h7. So this would have been fine for black, but I don't think he's going to trade on d8. More likely than not, he's going to drop back with bishop f2. Then I can drop back and defend my pawns. And then after, I don't know, some move like bishop d3, I'll play g6 anyway. I think white has a slight plus here because I have put the pawn on a5, and now his rook on b5 is really active. But in general, I think black is, well, definitely holding on. This is much better than how the game turned out. So in the game, I played bishop f6, which looks really natural. But it doesn't really challenge white's pieces on the queen side, and he's able to win a pawn basically by force. Now he found a really strong move b3, which I didn't even consider in the game because I just put my bishop on f6. I'm pointing at this rook, on a1. b3 is the last move someone would make, but of course he's making the move with tempo. I only have one real square for the queen h4, and then he immediately gets the rook to safety with rook to f1. And when this showed up on the board, I realized I'm in big trouble here, because all of his pieces are suddenly coordinated and very well developed, and he's either going to win the a5 pawn, or he's going to drop back bishop f2 and then take the pawn on b7. So black is going down a pawn here basically no matter what, and I was just trying to figure out a way to get some play going. I decided on this move g6, and unfortunately for me, he found the very accurate move bishop f2. I was really hoping he would just drop back bishop d3, where my idea was to play bishop to d8. Kind of similar to the other line, I realized that I have this move here. And if he takes on d8, let's say I take with, I think the f rook to keep the a5 pawn somewhat defended. And now if rook takes b7, I have queen d4 check, and queen takes d5. And black is totally in control here. If he doesn't take on d8 and just goes back, let's say bishop f2, then I drop back with queen to e7, and okay, I think black's pieces are arranged quite awkwardly with the queen here and the bishop on d8, but I am keeping my pawn, and I can regroup with queen c7, f5, bishop f6, and again, if I get all these moves in, then I think black starts sitting quite comfortably, although again, I do regret putting the pawn on a5 here. You put the pawn back on a6, black just has, I think, a really solid game. But he found the accurate move bishop f2, which doesn't allow me to regroup with queen to e7. I play queen h5. Now he plays bishop d3. And the pawn on b7 is very difficult to protect. The pawn on a5 is also difficult to protect. So basically black is losing material here on the queen side. I thought I found a decent plan here to create counterplay, but he was able to squash it pretty easily. Queen h6, rook takes b7, and f5. And this is typically how black often likes to play in this line. The idea is to play f4 and f3 and start opening up white's king. And if white isn't careful, then yeah, the plan is quite dangerous. But he was able to neutralize my play here really well. He played bishop d4, which I think makes sense. And unfortunately, if I play the natural move rook ae8, you know, the setup looks really nice for black, but this move bishop b5 just disrupts everything. And my rook is under attack. I can play, you know, this funny move knight to d7, but the problem is once he moves the queen, my knight is going to be pinned to the rook and hanging, and that's going to be bad. So I think any move like maybe even queen f2, and black has a tough time here. So after bishop d4, I played bishop f6. And here, I mean, if he takes on e5, I think black is really happy to see this, because now my bishop on e5 will be an absolute rock. And I can definitely try to break through with f4, g5, g4, just trying to create, you know, whatever I can on the dark squares. But instead he plays king h1, another good move. I think pretty easy for someone of his level. I'm threatening knight f3 check and taking the bishop, so king h1, just a simple prophylactic move. Now I played f4, and his next move, queen e4, was really fantastic. Just getting out of f3 with tempo, and now if I play f3, he has a nice idea in mind of just rook takes. And if I take the rook, he has queen e6 check, takes on f6, and everything comes with check. And then he can either give check here or just take on f3. Whoops. And white's just up a piece, and black has nothing here. So this move, queen e4, it basically kills all of my play, and now I'm just down a pawn. I have this interesting dark squared blockade going, but it's not going to last for very long. You know, once he really neutralizes everything, he's just going to play c4, c5, and my knight on e5 is just going to collapse. I guess I could have played rook ae8 back here, and this is something that Stockfish points out, and it gives some very interesting computer lines, but the idea is that after bishop to b5, which I would expect, I can play knight to d7, queen d3, and I have this move rook to e4, which wasn't working in the other line because my bishop was on g5. But here I'm hitting the bishop on d4, which means that my knight is hanging, but it's okay. And if he plays bishop takes f6, I'm in time to take with the knight. And yeah, here I feel like black is starting to get some actual compensation because I have this strong knight. I have some squares in the center. I can play rook e5 and knight e4, or I'm also threatening knight g4 potentially. And I think here white has to be really precise, you know, to make the most use out of his extra pawn. Maybe he has other ways of playing after rook a8 to get kind of more of an edge, but that was definitely my last chance to kind of keep the game going. Instead, after f4, queen e4, I drop back bishop g7 so that my bishop is not hanging in this line. And he plays bishop e2. I mean, he basically plays the rest of the game perfectly. Actually, I think he played the whole game without making any mistakes. Now f3 is fully under control. I played rook ae8, trying to get some discovery going. But even if I do move the knight, I have to be careful because g7 is hanging and is a big target. But he played bishop b5. Now my rook has to move. And here I really collapse with this move, rook to c8. I should have at least played rook to d8 and force him to win the game from here. Because if he plays bishop to b6, I don't think this is really a pawn he wants to go after, right? Like, we'll play rook to b8. I mean, maybe bishop c7 here, but if he takes on a5, I think f3. And then black does start to get something because his two bishops are very, very far from the king side and not really contributing to the defense there. Although bishop c7 looks like an annoying move to meet. Yeah, maybe black can play rook to c8 here, and then if he takes on a5, we'll play f3. And this is the last thing that white wants, is to allow, you know, this ready-made attack with the f-pawn. So of course he wouldn't play bishop b6. I think he would just continue with some normal moves and maybe even c4. and c5, just trying to undermine the knight as quickly as possible. But in the game, I played rook to c8, which allows bishop to d7. And if I take on d7, he plays queen e6 check. Then he takes on g7. Rook takes d7. And he's up a pawn, and the d6 pawn is falling. And I don't think black is going to get any real compensation here. I think he's just going to have a winning position, because my king is also going to end up quite weak in the heavy piece endgame. So I went back to d8. He throws in bishop e6 check, king h8, and now nice move rook f3. And I think this is actually a resignable position already, because now I clearly have no ideas, or no threats in the position. G7 is hanging, so I can't take on f3. I tried to play the move g5 because why not? Maybe I can get g4 in or something, but I was very skeptical. Mostly just playing out of inertia because we were about to reach the time control. c4. I played rook e8. He goes c5, and now I kind of just went for a desperate sack with rook takes e6, just to finally get my move in with g4. But it's not nearly enough in this position. I mean, white has a lot of winning ways here, but he found basically the most straightforward way to win. He starts with e7, hitting the rook. I put the rook on g8. Then he takes the f4 pawn. I took on h3. And of course, the only way white can really blunder here is to take back on h3. This would be quite shocking if he went for this, because now I have some discoveries. Although I'm not even sure. Well, black is probably winning this now. Maybe bishop h6 or bishop f6. But of course, white has zero need to go in for this. After g takes h3, he played g3, which is much smarter, leaving his king a lot safer. I played queen h5, threatening queen to d1 check, but he realized it's not a real threat and just took on d6. And here I just resigned because I have one check but on d1, but it really doesn't lead to anywhere after cd6. You can take the h3 pawn, you can play rook to f2. Meanwhile, my knight is collapsing, and of course now he has these like connected monsters on e7 and d6. So after cd6 I did resign, and that was that. So definitely an interesting middle game. I think I learned a lot about the Sicilian just from analyzing this one, and well, we have 2 more rounds to go. Round 8 will be tomorrow and round 9 the next day. And until next time, take care.